Thank you. I was thinking I was going to have to shout all night, but I've found the sound man. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so welcome to the awards and lectures on World Environment Day 2018. A huge thank you to Arup for hosting this event and allowing the Society to do this. I'm Dougal Driver, the Vice Chairman of the Society. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a moment. But just a few things that were on the slides rotating before we came into the room, or as you came into the room. There is an online delegate pack which you can download from the Society's website. Phil Underwood, who's been sort of sorting out everything for today, said, well, that will save some trees. I think he may have forgot at that moment, looking at my forester friends in the audience, that saving paper does not necessarily save trees. It saves chlorine and bleach and water and carbon and other things. And if you want another lecture on that, see me afterwards. So please do download that, have a look at it online, and any of the SocEnv team will be able to help you. So some housekeeping first of where we are. So if there is no alarms planned, if you go back out the way you came, it is that door in the corner, and you're going to have to beat me if the alarm goes off, and I'm still stood here. So out there, and then lots of fire exits in just about every other corner than the one you've come out of. So don't turn around and come back on yourself. Okay, so up the stairs and all the four corners. And if you haven't found them already, the facilities are over diagonally to the left in the far corner. We have a lot to get through, and I will try and do my bits as soon as possible, because we have, as you have seen hopefully from the agenda, we have some great speakers and we have some important awards to make as well. So a little bit about me. Again, some will know that my passion at the moment is Grown in Britain, which is about British trees and forests and the supply chains. And we set that up about 4 or 5 years ago. And if anyone wants to talk to me about Grown in Britain, rather than again getting another 3-day lecture from me, please again do just ask, take the opportunity. I am a member of 2 of the constituent bodies that feed into CEnv status, and I am very proud of my Chartered Environmentalist status on top of, if you like, my core institutional qualifications. And I'm Vice Chair of the Society of the Environment. Will, our chairman, is here and will be making some presentations later. Will's had a very busy day across the country, and so has kindly sort of deferred to me for this evening. And World Environment Day was not particularly owned by anyone last year. Peter, former chair, and others, we had an event last year, some of you may have been at, and we feel it's a space well worth filling. And we hope tonight will show that we really do see this as something that we want to see grow. Here's the agenda very quickly, just so that you can get a sense of what we're going to be doing. Professor Ian Boyd needs to go to another event fairly sharpish, so we're going to do a Q&A after Ian's talk. So just bear that in mind. And there will be Q&A opportunities for us as we go through. So do hold your questions and avoid making statements. That's how I will chair this. So a bit more about those bodies I talked about. You'll recognise some of those. And some key stats. It's interesting, Stephanie from Arup, who's really made this whole venue happen for us, so we're very grateful, Stephanie, but she was reminded by Elaine, who's the sort of heartbeat of SocEnv, if you know the organisation, that Stephanie was the 5,000th Chartered Environmentalist. And the figure here, I mean, I don't know how long ago that was, but a few years, but we're climbing to over 7,000 there. So the figures are all going in the right direction. If you look at the right-hand side, we've got 15%. That's about 1,000, my poor maths, actually based abroad. And that's something that the Cabinet has been recently discussing, and it's something that we're very intrigued by, proud of, I think, and also excited by as well. As is the age profile moving in the right direction, And the gender balance isn't too bad. This event being an exception. So you're going to hear a lot about things you know a lot about, but you're going to hear it from people who know more than most, and that's really exciting. And you'll have seen the hashtag, hopefully, about pledge less plastic. It's had an amazing hit rate, and so the online ability to sort of make much more of a noise. Talking to my own sort of children and their friends about this, making them make pledges, really does work. Works for me, and I think hopefully it works for you as well. It's something that is a real feature of this year's World Environment Day, I think. And we've teamed up with Emyr and their supporters such as Siemens, Wilmot Dixon, Skanska, Rolls-Royce and Canary Wharf Group to raise real awareness around this. Just going to skip through to keep the pace up to some sort of case studies, which again you can see online, and you can see and read these for yourselves. But Jacobs went global, over 200 offices, with their inspiration for the day. And the tracking would be interesting to see what comes out of the other side. And I can see year on year these things starting to become looking at trends and looking at behavioural change as well. Of course, behavioural change is going to be a feature, I'm sure, of the evening. Something that E.ON are doing, some pretty good figures there, some pretty high figures, great to see. And Andrew Marlowe has done something that, I mean, I'm not sure I can say vlog. Is that how you say it? Whatever. It's a blog with a V. 10 short videos. I mean, that just sounds quite ambitious to start with. And obviously very engaging. So do check out the SocEnv YouTube channel. Phil, when will they be? It says will be on. As soon as possible. Really unfair chairmanship there. I am so sorry. So the pledges, people have done some great stuff. And these are just a few case studies, a few examples. We've created these pledge cards. We've worked on how to engage people, and that toolkit now we can build on year on year, and it's a great campaign for doing that. And I guess these are global figures around the hashtag, are they? The use of the hashtag. So a couple of million. I kind of would expect that, and I think we need to make that 10 times that next year. So what am I going to do now? I'm going to launch a research program to see how homegrown renewable forest products can replace plastic products. Well, why wouldn't I? Because I run Grown in Britain. But actually, Charlie Law, who's in the audience, who's run some Grown in Britain projects with me, knows that we've been looking to replace forest products from homegrown sources to substitute imported wood products, because if they're buying it made out of wood from abroad, why not substitute it for a British alternative? It's actually it's a lot harder to actually tackle maybe plastic substitution. Well, Charlie, you heard it here first. Your Honour Executive, you can hold me to that pledge. We will develop in Grown in Britain that research programme. And if anyone feels they've got something to offer that programme, which will start tomorrow, please do speak to me. I'm not difficult to get hold of, but I will be around afterwards. I need all the help I can get, and I've seen the delegate list, and you can help. Okay, so that's enough from me. I will be linking things together tonight, but I'm going to give Professor Ian Boyd just a 10-second warning that we're now going to move into his talk. As I say, Ian's going to be short and relatively sharp, but we will do some Q&A afterwards. Ian, if you can come forward. Ian is Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, my former employer, and I said to Ian, be as thought-provoking and as challenging as you can. I realise that you're maybe not as free as some others, and I used to work in the department, so I understand. He said, no, it's changed now, it's a little bit different, and I will be challenging. So let's hope so. Ian, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, Dougal. Thank you. Actually, I don't have any slides.
Okay, so that will stay behind you.
Right, that's fine. That's great. I'll just put that down. So thank you very much indeed for the invitation to speak this evening. As Dougal said, I'll be quite short. I hope I'll be reasonably controversial. And I also have to reflect on the fact that I've been in DEFRA now for coming up 6 years, actually. And we've gone through the department itself, and I think the department, reflecting partly public opinion, has gone through a complete sea change in that time in terms of its approach to, I'll say waste, but we're talking about plastics mainly here, but I'm going to come back to waste later on. I experienced the time when we had to try and get a plastic bag charge through the Treasury. The immense amount of resistance there was to that, because it was just seen as an additional tax that was going to penalise the economy, etc., despite the fact that all the evidence said that actually putting a small charge on plastic bags made a big difference. And lo and behold, the evidence has been borne out by the subsequent evidence that actually putting a very small charge on plastic bags reduces plastic bag consumption by about 80%. So we're learning, and actually now we're in a position where the Treasury is actually saying to us, give us more. You know, we can actually make money out of getting rid of plastic. But actually, the change has happened really, really quickly. Just 2 years ago, I kicked off a project with Sir Mark Walport, which was a report about waste. It was published late last year. It's called From Waste to Resource Productivity. When we kicked that off, waste was just completely at the bottom of the priority list for ministers. They simply just didn't want to know. There was nothing politically good about talking about waste. And now it has changed completely. They're kind of lining up to want to be the guru of getting rid of plastics. So I think we have to reflect on the fact that what can move in a good direction, and I would say it's a good direction, can also move quite quickly in a bad direction. So as with all things in government, there's a window here of opportunity has opened up, and we have to make use of it. So I just want to also just reflect a little bit, and I know with an audience like this, which is probably knows more about the subject than I do, actually, it's quite difficult to say anything that is particularly novel. But let's reflect a little bit on why plastics are a subject of discussion at the moment, quite apart from the fact that David Attenborough did quite a lot to get plastics in the public mind, although I don't think, my personal view is I don't think that was the complete driver behind it by any means. I think The Blue Planet was a fantastic series, but actually I think we were already moving in this direction. What Blue Planet did was just give it a bit of a boost. I mean, fundamentally, we don't like plastics because they're unsightly, they're ubiquitous, and kind of it creates alarmist views in people's minds. The vision of rivers choked with plastics or plastics in the ocean, all of those visions are absolutely true. And we've increased our production of plastics from 5 million tons globally in 1950 to about 100 million tons today. And today we produce about 5 million tons, or consume about 5 million tons within the UK alone. And families throw away about 40 kilograms of recyclable plastic every year. So there's a big job to be done. So they're lasting and they're durable, and they don't go away. And they also break down into microplastics, we think. Now, this is where the evidence is beginning to sort of turn out to be a little bit shaky. They do break down into microplastics, but we don't quite know what microplastics do in the environment. I mean, there's emerging evidence that says actually they're not good. And I think if you were being precautionary, you would say that by definition, somewhere or other in the environment, microplastics are not really going to be good for wherever they get to. And most of them, in the end, get into the sea in some way or other. So we have to be very conscious of the fact that there's going to be concentration of plastics within certain parts of the environment, and they are probably going to have negative effects. But right now, if somebody was to ask me what's the evidence that microplastics have negative effects, I would have to say it's actually quite minimal. So do we go out and collect the evidence? Yes, of course we should, but we've got to do that in a very objective way and not just going out to demonstrate that it's negative. We've got to actually have a balanced hypothesis testing process. But I would also say that it's not plastic itself that's bad. It's plastics in the wrong place that are bad. So, there are problems with the current debate about plastics. Of course, we want to make the best of the current debate in terms of trying to drive, as Dougal said, behaviour change, policy change, those sorts of things, and actually try to introduce policies that at other times would have been extraordinarily difficult. But it's really unlikely we're going to find cheaper sources of materials that do the job as well as plastics. I think we have to face up to that. And to some extent, some of these are going to be single-use plastics. So I slightly cringe when I see in the news, and it's probably been in the news today, about the banning of single-use plastics. And I cringe because of the bigger picture there is about waste. Single-use plastics, particularly in the food industry, are really useful for food preservation. And we could send ourselves down a really very negative route if we withdrew single-use plastics from the food industry, because food waste is a very large problem. Food waste is very environmentally damaging. It's one of our major sources of greenhouse gas production. And it's something that we have a real problem getting a grip on, particularly in the household. So the more we can do to reduce food waste, the better. So dealing with plastics is not, I think, and the main message I want to give, it's not about dealing with plastics alone. We really need to start seeing plastics as just the tip of an iceberg here. We don't like plastics because they're unsightly, but actually underpinning plastics is a huge mountain of issues around pollution and waste in the environment. And I would also say that our ideas about the circular economy are something that I would slightly challenge. The circular economy is great. Anything I'm going to say should not undermine our drive to increase the circular economy and make it work better than it does at the moment. However, it will not solve our waste problem, because it's an equilibrium problem. In other words, the outputs have to equal the inputs. Even though we might grow the circular economy, we know that we cannot grow the circular economy at the same rate as the whole economy. And therefore, the only way of reducing waste is actually to reduce the inputs. So I think what Dougal put up earlier on with respect to what some companies are doing with respect to trying to drive down consumption is absolutely the message that we need to get over. But it's not consumption just of plastics. It's consumption of a whole range of different types of basic raw materials. And one of the dangers that we face with the plastics problem is that we don't see it as part of that larger system. We simply solve the plastics problem and shift the problem somewhere else. Every plastic cup needs to be replaced by something else. Is that something else more costly to produce? Does it have more environmental costs at the end of the day? And that's a question that we can't fully answer. So, just in summary, I think we all have to welcome the current consciousness about plastics, but we do have a record of trying to manage these things out of the system and actually just creating a problem somewhere else. So we have to manage it, the whole problem as a systems problem. And it can't just be about plastics. I would also say that I think we need to try to rejig the narrative about waste generally and start talking about resources. And it's resources, waste just happens to be resources with negative value, and understand how we upvalue those resources and bring them back into the system. That's obviously about the circular economy, and reduce the overall inputs to the system. Finally, I think talking about systems approaches, government is really stepping up to this now. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. I think it's really stepping up to it. We've got a number of different strategies in place, 25-year environment plan, something called Health and Harmony, which is about food farming and the environment. We've got the Clean Air Strategy. We've got a marine strategy coming up. We've got a resource and waste strategy coming up, which is built on the top of the report that I produced. We've got the industrial strategy, obviously, and we've got the clean growth strategy. So there's a whole range of different strategies there. If you actually see them as a whole, it's a systems approach to the problem. I'm not sure the government really actually understands what it's done, but it's actually pulled together most of the components of a systems approach. And unless we take that systems approach, we're not going to solve the problem. Thank you.
Okay, so questions and answers, shortish answers, very short questions, no statements from anybody. Peter.
Thank you. Ian, a very interesting presentation, but I'd like to go back to what you said at the beginning about what the Treasury said about give us some more. And we need to ask ourselves a question as to whether or not an environmental tax is there to change behaviour or to raise income. When the government launched the sugar tax, it talked about £539 million income, you know, and perhaps more coming. Isn't the target £0?
Thank you. I actually think it's both. I think you have to have a trade-off sitting there. I think that to make this work, I think that there needs to be some positives for the Exchequer as well, because they will lose in other ways, because there will be economic costs associated with reducing consumption to some extent, and it will have an economic impact. We don't quite know what that economic impact is, but the Treasury needs to be able to balance its books. And the only way to sell it to them is to say, actually, you're going to get some income from this. And by the way, you know, in addition, we get all these environmental benefits from it.
You finished by saying we've got all of these. Oh, thank you. We've got all of these different strategies that are being introduced, and that they are delivering a systems approach. So, what's our hope for seeing that systems approach continuing past the next umpteen years? Is it something that's going to take root fundamentally within a government approach?
Up to a point, it depends how people vote, doesn't it? But actually, more seriously, certainly, you know, Michael Gove wants a 25-year environment plan, and he wants it to be over those sort of timescales, so whole generations. And the 25-year environment plan for us sits right across all these other strategies. So it's a long-term view, and the, if you like, the legislative and regulatory structures that are intended to be put in place, they're not in place yet, should hold government to account for those that sort of period of time at the very least. And I could point to the Climate Change Act as an example of the kind of legislation that is required in order to make that happen.
One more. Charlie?
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, Charlie Law, Sustainable Construction Solutions. You said there that plastics are not bad, but it's plastics in the wrong place that are bad. How do we ensure that what this 5 million tonnes consumed in the UK each year does not end up in the wrong place, considering that we're dealing with people? And I think that is usually
there's a really long answer to that one, and there's a short one. It's about making sure we design plastics out when they're not required. We only use them when they're required, and when they are required, we make sure that the people who own them know that they own them. And that's actually, there's a lot underneath that, because it's about extended producer responsibility and all those sorts of things. But when you buy something that is packaged in plastic or made of plastic, you as an individual need to know that you own that and you have responsibility for it.
Okay, Ian, I know you need to run. Could we just show our appreciation for Ian for coming? Ian, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so Costas, please do come forward as I say a little bit about you. I was interested to, you can read some of that behind us. I was interested to hear what the Professor was saying about, some of the microplastics. I couldn't wait to get you up here to hopefully inform and challenge, which is what it's all about. So the thing that I picked out from your citation is that you lead on global work around solid plastic waste, don't you? And I think that's it's fantastic to have somebody here to talk to us with that sort of insight into what's going on across the globe. And you've come all the way down from Leeds, so maybe you can square that geographic circle for us. You're very, very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a great day of celebration, the day of the environment, but it's also a great day to rethink where our efforts have been leading and what we've been achieving and where we should go from here. I think I'm here in multiple hats on my day life. I'm an academic at the University of Leeds, but I'm also here because I'm involved in CEWM as one of the constituent bodies of the Society for the Environment. And on the international version of the CEWM, which is the International Solid Waste Association, ISWA. So I'm chairing a task force that ISWA established to tackle the problem of marine litter, and we're focusing obviously on plastics because this is more of the damage, or maybe also the interest lies. So we have exactly 1 year ago started a new, I wouldn't say just task force is not really a good term. I mean, it's a partnership between the experts and the organizations in the waste and resources sector internationally and those who want to see solutions in the direction of preventing marine litter in the very first place. And we say, keep plastic waste out of our oceans, please, now. Well, who wouldn't subscribe to such a statement? It's easy these days also. It's all the momentum in the society, in the experts around. And of course there are controversial areas, and of course there's ambiguity, and I by all means easily subscribe to all the statements of Professor Boyd, and actually might be difficult to find some things to challenge you, but hopefully there will be some challenging ideas and some new ideas in my presentation. So we're all familiar with that sort of images in the media and maybe your own experiences. I come from Greece. When I grew up by the beach, you would see even 30, 40 years ago situations like that. And this is the narrative we're getting, but where does this material come from? We don't lack it there, but is it something that was generated there? Well, actually, this is where most of the material comes from. Poorly managed or totally unmanaged solid waste. I know this is a complex issue. This is a photo from me, of course, and I look totally ludicrous in front of this pile of dumped waste. This is the biggest dump site in Africa, ladies and gentlemen. It's called Dandora. It's in Nairobi, where the headquarters of the United Nations are. And we've been there just before Christmas for the UNEA 3, where all the ministers of environment of the world gathered to put forward new resolutions. We're very pleased about the resolution around marine litter. I'll come to that later. But I escaped the nice and leafy and protected environment of UN and went to see the real thing. And this is, you can't really see it, but as long as your eyes goes, this is dumped waste. How does this relate to marine litter? Well, you see a few kilometers on the other side of Nairobi is also Kibera, the biggest slum area, the biggest informal settlement in Africa. Nairobi has 4 million people, 2.5 million live in informal settlements. It doesn't exist 100 years ago, this city. So this is where these people are accumulating, and now you see this is their by the pavement drainage, and what happens? This is actually an open sewer, drainage, canal, you name it. It's full of plastic waste, and they're selling their nice food and trying to survive in this environment. And eventually it goes through to the water from smaller to bigger and bigger water bodies. So globally, on a planetary scale, ladies and gentlemen, this is where most of the plastic waste comes from. And if we don't do something about it, there is no hope that we're going to turn the tap and solve the plastics marine later. So as I said, we're familiar with the turtle images and this, but there's not so many images in the media about dump sites or landfills by the sea or direct dumping into the sea. We have issues with fly tipping in this country. Some of them are in direct water bodies, but the scale of things we're talking here are totally different. This is happens, it's direct dumping in the Amazon River in Brazil. So systems approach by all means, and I would argue that the problem on a higher level is a combination of 4 systemic failures on a global scale. Of course, it relates to the material properties and our ability to innovate around plastics. We have 5 different thousand types of plastics if you take the polymer plus the additives that they give the different functionality. It's so very difficult to do something with them, and we consume a lot of them but just because we need them and just because more people want to live with a high standard around the world. But most importantly, we don't have the infrastructure to handle with the waste, the solid waste, around the world. So 2 billion, of course, people around the world don't have basic waste collection in place. 3 billion don't have sound disposal, like a proper minimal level of environmental protection landfill. And of course, our recycling suffers. Why does this happen? Because we put a lot of resources collecting the material and pushing it to the markets. We released as part of the Globalization Task Force 3 years ago a report about our exports to China, and not many people wanted to hear, but we sort of predicted and alerted the world about the forthcoming crisis, and here you are today. Now this document found its way to the new European plastic strategy. Is great, so Europe wants to see what happens to our waste recyclables exported around the world. Fantastic. But also, we have knowledge gaps. Professor Bode referred to one of them. What happens with the damage from the microplastics? And this is just one of the challenges. These knowledge gaps prevent us from deploying effective solutions at different scales. So this is a complex problem. Interestingly, it has a lot of similarities with many other global dimensional problems, with the greenhouse gases emissions and the climate change, and with the ozone depletion layer problem. It's a problem where small actions here and there, individual and wider actions, cause local damage, but also accumulate at the global scale. And that's why it's very difficult to create a coherent narrative and a simple solution. There is no single simple solution. Or maybe there is some solutions can have most of the impact very fast. And I'm going to come to that. We're familiar with the littering in the streets, and we have a fly tipping problem, as I said, in the UK. 1 million reported cases in the government's database of fly tipping, waste illegally disposed of small quantities here and there in the UK. The government is acting on that, but also there is a lot that comes from the marine environment itself, but where the biggest problem is direct dumping, open dumping, and improper disposal around the world. So, if we want to see a solution soon to this problem, or at any time, we argue that we need a reprioritization. We need sound collection for the 2 billion people, fellow humans, who live without their waste being collected. So they have nothing to do. They're going to dump it, they're going to burn it. We need to stop fly tipping and littering and open dumping. We need to close dump sites close to water bodies. To me, these are the absolute priorities if we are to see any solution on the problem. Wait a minute, how about the circular economy? Yes, we do need a circular economy, but as has been voiced already, circular economy is not something totally new. It has limitations and will not deliver solutions because you need to massively change our innovation model to get there. So it will deliver solutions in the long term, 30 years from now, while focusing on collecting the waste and preventing it from being dumped at the wrong places, can deliver solutions in the medium to a short term, so 10 to 15 years from now. And focusing on this, we can have results now. There's another reason we should be focusing on these macroplastics. It's not just the damage on the marine environment. Of course, they're causing flooding, they're causing all sorts of other problems, but are the hugest also potential pool of microplastics. So they break down. I have a student looking at the moment how they're breaking down, reviewing the literature. There's a lot of knowledge gaps there. What's the pace? What they break down into? In which environment? Under which conditions? But in fact, they break down much faster than we thought 30 years ago. So we're interested for primary microplastics and those who come from our washing our clothes. But this is the huge, biggest pool of microplastics. And if they are dispersed, we cannot really intervene. Talking globally, I would like to touch upon a couple of other aspects of a global dimension. As I said, I had the pleasure of work with the current president of the Chartered Institution of Waste Management, Professor Wilson, who chaired the work commissioned by United Nations Environment Program a couple of years ago on producing the first global waste management outlook. And there we've done a back of the envelope calculation, because always with waste the data are a challenge. But we've done this calculation and came up with this number about the 2 billion people who don't have waste collection in the first place. And those people are who need the solution. And those people providing the services and the infrastructure are the start of the problem. Now, of course, in this work, we pointed out also the relationship between sustainable development goals and sound waste and resources practices. There is no specific sustainable development goal as such for waste. There's, of course, for water, is number 14, and there are other ones dispersed around the different SDGs that relate to solid waste. And we're doing some work currently on some of them at United Nations. But in all honesty, we are deluding ourselves if we believe that we're going to sort out the 14.1 target, which calls for massive reduction of land-based pollution that is led to the oceans, including marine litter and plastic marine litter in particular, without sorting out all the other sub-SDGs and targets that relate to solid waste management and resources management. We produce, therefore, a report which tries to put the evidence together and make it this link between sound waste management and prevention of marine litter much more clear. So by all means, it's freely available to download from our website. And this is just a starting point. We started this work 1 year ago, and what we're doing is we want to engage with all the major international players, and that's why we launched this work exactly 1 year ago in the first Ocean Conference which took place in New York in the United Nations headquarters. And since then we've been involved into many major international activities. We're very pleased, especially for the United Nations UNEA 3 resolution that puts sound management of waste on the top of solving the marine litter problem. So I do welcome this development. We were there. We worked close with the governments, especially with the government of Norway, which showed fantastic leadership. We hope the UK government will also step up to the role, and there's encouraging really messages there through the Commonwealth initiative. So definitely a lot of potential to do so. I'm going to go towards the end, also talking about the KfW. We need much more money there. Development finance, we released another report 3 years ago in which we stated the fact that there is only 0.3% of the global development finance directed towards solving the solid waste problem. Well, with this amount of money and support, there is no hope really, ladies and gentlemen, that the infrastructure and the capacity building needed to see a massive change, a massive improvement will ever happen. That's why we pledged to increase this up to 2030 to 3% from 0.3. Let's see if this happens, but definitely the KfW Development Finance Forum also concluded that this is the solution and we need to focus on that. Now, of course, there's a whole team working back on that. at the ISVA General Secretariat, and experts also from the UK have been represented there. And we're having a lot of support, mainly from Scandinavian countries and international companies. But of course, we would welcome all the excellent support from the fantastic capacity that exists within the Society of the Environment constituent bodies. And we are really keeping on what we're going to be doing for this year. We're going to be trying to model the sources, pathways of solid waste to the water in the different microenvironment, focusing on rivers as our first reality in low-income countries. We're going to releasing these at the World Congress in the Kuala Lumpur at end of October, and I would welcome you to have a look at this work and see how it can contribute and how it really aligns, hopefully, with your efforts to change the environment on a global scale. Thank you very much.
So we're going to roll straight into the next speaker, and we'll have some Q&A for both Costas and Stephanie afterwards. Okay, so Stephanie, McGibbon, if you'd like to come up to the podium, please. Director of Environment here at Arup, and as you've already heard, a Chartered Environmentalist. Thank you very much again for hosting us tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. So, as has been mentioned, my name is Stephanie McGibbon, and I'm a director here at Arup. Been with the company for 17 years, seen some changes over that time. And I had forgotten about becoming the 5,000th environmentalist until Elaine had mentioned it. Completely slipped my mind. But I do remember at the time it happened that a few people thought I had orchestrated it, the timing of my submission, so that I would become the 5,000th. I can assure you that was not the case. It was a complete fluke, a happy one. It was a nice sort of splash at the time and everything. So thank you to the Society retrospectively for that. I do want to say that just to highlight the importance of becoming a member of the Environmental Society, becoming a Chartered Environmentalist. And my role at Arup encompasses a number of things. One of them includes being staff manager and recruiting, and it's important that the people we recruit have either chartered or have an appetite to become so, just in terms of recognition, credibility within the profession, and also looking ideally to be extending and influencing the profession as well. So we are absolutely delighted to be hosting this event, World Environment Day for the Society. We're environmental professionals. We have a team here in Arup of more than 70 people living and breathing different aspects of environment, and in some sort of perhaps less obvious ways that you might have hadn't had a chance to experience in the pre-event activities with the sound lab and the visualization and the sort of technical wizardry that helps us do our work even better. And also something in some respects conceptually is quite simple, like the Wild West End, sort of green roof space right in the heart of London, and introducing and promoting biodiversity there in a way that's been really successful. And sometimes the solutions don't always have to be big technical things. They can be actually quite simple, and just having the initiative and the determination to make something of them. So we have an expression which in Arup underpins what we're looking to achieve, which on the one hand it sounds very modest, on the other hand I have to say I think is very difficult. And it's our mantra, if you like, is to shape a better world. And after 17 years of managing environmental impact assessments, which is what I do, I think, gosh, this is actually quite hard. And we've had some, I think, quite sobering information from Costas, particularly in terms of the challenge that we're confronted with on a day-to-day basis. And I want to highlight, for me, an example which epitomises what that challenge is. And it comes from my work on the Thames Tideway Tunnel project. And for those of you who don't know, Thames Tideway Tunnel, essentially, it's under construction now. It will be great big sewer, so 25 kilometres long, deep underneath the River Thames, crossing 14 local authorities in London. Much needed because at the moment, with only as little as 2 millimetres of rainfall, that's enough to cause a discharge of untreated sewage straight into the River Thames and all that that entails. And the River Thames being tidal, what gets washed into the river sticks around for weeks at a time. So not good for us, not good for the things that are living or could be living in the river if the conditions were better. One of the things I did actually during that time was through the charity Thames River Watch help with sort of Citizen Science campaign to go along onto the foreshore, have your big waders on and your rubber gloves and go testing the water, checking water quality and also litter picking. And not surprisingly, the most prevalent material that was found on the foreshore is of course plastic, for the reasons you will be well aware of. And interestingly, somewhat interestingly, the most of the plastics, the most common item were earbuds. I thought it would be water bottles, but it's earbuds, which just seem to be all over the place. The Thames River Watch do fantastic initiatives like this, and I was just checking their website before this event, and I feel kind of duty-bound to mention to you that, for example, they have a training session this Saturday in Greenwich where you too could become a leader in undertaking these type of voluntary initiatives. So if you don't know of them, I suspect many of you will do, but if you don't, then their website's definitely worth having a look at, thames21.org.uk. Anyway, some nice kind of symmetries and convergence here actually, I think, coincidentally. Because this thing about plastic bags and the 5p. So our behaviour, even as environmentalists, I'm sure has been influenced by 5p. So I'm so annoyed if I'm without a plastic bag and I'd rather carry things in my arms, dropping them along the way, than paying 5p for a plastic bag when I know I have so many bags for life and what have you at home. But one thing that stayed with me from my time on Tideway, and it made me think how hard this challenge is that during that time the Tideway Project Office was in West London, Paddington, and quite a few people came from the west part of the country, Bristol, Cardiff and so on. At that time in Wales, the 5p charge, when I was working on the Tideway, 5p charge had already been introduced, had not yet been introduced in England. And I found that one of my, I have to say, environmental colleagues travelling from South Wales and spending 3 days a week at the Paddington Project Office would purposely buy his lunch and get a free plastic bag, thereby allowing him to save 15p and take those plastic bags back to Wales. And I thought, this is someone, a sort of co-environmentalist. And I thought, this is why I say, it's on the one hand it's simple, on the one hand it's hard as well. So interesting how that 5p has made a difference, and I think about the work that we do in terms of environmental impact assessment, and I think perhaps in quite a reflective mood after more than 17 years managing environmental impact assessments on all kinds of projects, thinking about the impending potential changes with Brexit and who knows what we will be left with, and the environmental standards and credentials that we'll be working with. And I sort of look back and I think, right, well, what difference did I make actually on these projects I've worked on Thames Tideway Tunnel and all kinds, and I can certainly tell you about the very big reports that we produce, and the days and weeks and who knows how long of my life going through page turnings because of the fear of judicial review challenge and things like that. But I question the extent to which the environmental impact assessment, what I do, is really fulfilling what it needs to in terms of achieving the culture of it. In my opinion, it is my opinion, not Arup, is about reducing adverse effects. It's making it not much worse than it is. And to me, that's a woeful lack of ambition in terms of the environmental agenda. what can we do to have a positive legacy so that it's not about, well, there's a few minor adverse effects, one or two major things, it's okay, in the greater good it's necessary. There isn't a culture, there isn't an expectation that the outcome of the assessment, and on many development projects, is that you need to be making the environment better. It's not so much worse. And I think that's a flaw which I've suddenly realised after all these years, that's what we need. So I sort of asked myself, what's the equivalent of that 5p that we have with the plastic bags that will transform the environmental impact assessment and the quality and the sort of the projects and the development that's happening that will benefit everybody. We have time after the presentations to talk, and I would welcome any suggestions from anyone or ideas or discussion on this point, whether you agree with me or whether you don't. Interested to hear. I just want to come back to this notion of shaping a better world. That is the desire, that is the objective, even if it's hard, and even if the impact we're making is small, that's what we're looking to achieve. We are embracing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them. So what can we do in our business, in the projects we work on and the clients we work for, that will promote a sustainable future for all, that will embrace these 17 goals? Leave it there, and thank you very much for being here this evening.
Okay, so we now have time for questions for Costas and Stephanie. Martin, if you can talk without a microphone, if we can bring the microphone here for Caroline. Sorry, Martin, and sorry, that's Martin and I do know each other, I can assure you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for two fantastic presentations. But I think the connection for me was around the social engagement. Given the scale of the challenge that you saw in Africa, is there any progress, do you think, on the local society recognising their challenge and their part to play, or are they in a state of survival, not being able to see beyond their challenges? And would, in your experience, that experience you've had on the Thames Tideway in terms of getting community engagement, be a positive step forward in the challenge of discussing?
Was your question about community engagement, that sort of area? No? Anyone else on community engagement? Got another slide? Okay.
Yeah, so in response to the question on community engagement, we talk about it a lot, and we allow time for it in terms of environmental impact assessment. My honest opinion is that it happens in such a way that the opportunity for real influence, so by the time a community is aware of a project, Thames Tideway Tunnel for example, things are already really quite advanced. There'll be policy statements in place, and although they will have been consulted on, I don't think people quite engage with something which is abstract compared to this will affect me and my life and where I live. And I think there is certainly opportunities, if we're going to do community engagement, for it to be genuine and for it to be meaningful, and that you do have a chance to influence the process, to influence the outcome, not, as I think can happen, that it's less about engagement, it's more about notifying. You're informing people this is happening, they're aware. It's better than nothing, but don't dress it up as something which it isn't, which is engagement, when decisions in principle may well have already been made.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed both of those talks very much. I wanted to ask you, though, Stephanie, about the link between the two major areas you were talking about. So when we talked about plastics, and Costas did the same, we're talking about altering people's attitudes and stopping things happening at source, so as being the main solution. If we turn to the Tideway Tunnel, which you were talking about as part of your talk as well, we're then talking very much what looks like to me as an end-of-pipe solution, where if we wanted to address it at source, we would be looking higher up the network at stopping water getting in, stopping these overflows and so on, but we're not. we're exploring an end-of-pipe solution. So why is it we go for one solution with one type of problem and a different solution with another?
I don't believe that they are mutually exclusive, and certainly for Thames Tideway Tunnel, there was a lot of effort applied, it had to be, in terms of would it be a tunnel or would it be something else, and there was, I think one could almost call it a campaign in terms of sustainable urban drainage. Why can't we have that? I suppose the irony actually is that one of the reasons that the tunnel was promoted was because we were not complying with the European Wastewater Treatment Directive. We need to do something quite fast. And whilst London has grown, the population has spread, there's more development, there's more hygiene has changed a lot, improved. We still rely on basically a Victorian system, and it seemed that there was no realistic prospect that there could be something as an alternative to the tunnel. But these, I mean, in a way it is end of pipe, but it's not to say that you then don't do other things as well. I think we need all of them.
Well, thank you very much, Jean Venables. A question about the plastic waste. If in the UK we use plastic and dispose of it responsibly, does it become a problem in the oceans? What I'm asking, I suppose, is do you think that our waste industry is actually managing that issue thoroughly? I certainly have observed in other countries where litter gets into rivers and, as you just demonstrated, then gets into the water environment. But we seem to be concentrating in this country on the use of plastic rather than on the proper disposal and mechanisms for dealing with it when it becomes waste. Both are issues, but surely it's the waste disposal that's the problem.
Absolutely, and I will address also the previous one quickly, saying that in Africa and generally in low-income countries or the impoverished parts of mega cities of the world, people want to see better solutions. Sometimes they don't have. So if you grew up into this mess, sometimes you cannot see beyond that. You don't know what is it. So your experience is really adapted to what is your destiny, actually. That said, those people, no matter how poor or without the means and solutions, are really willing eventually to engage with improvement processes, even willing to pay small sums for collection, and you don't have to go very high-tech to find solutions. The governance and social aspects, including engagement of the communities, are critical in solving the problem. Now, in the UK, we have a different challenge. Definitely we have a challenge. Part of it is for the combined sewer overflows. This is outdated infrastructure, as you said. Part is littering behavior. We don't do as well maybe as some other equally financially developed parts of the world. We have a problem of fly tipping unexpectedly, or expectedly, I don't know, it comes as a shock to me, but we have. So if we're able to dispose of everything and recycle in the right way, we would have much of a lesser problem. We would have only the part of it that relates to behavioral and what is accepted in different settings and different groups. That said, we do have a problem. And I don't want to bring bad news to us, but if you go and talk to our Scandinavian friends who are receiving a lot of marine litter through the Gulf Stream, they're not very happy about the UK. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, I don't know, but definitely there's a challenge for our society in a globalized environment to act upon that. Of course, the fundamental problem is value. If the waste could have more value, as Professor Boyd said before, this would be totally different, and extended producer responsibility schemes might be part of the solution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking those questions as well. That last point of the Scandinavians being, I remember when I was in DEFRA, we were blaming our air pollution on what was coming across from the continent. I think it's possibly easier to stop plastic in the ocean than airborne pollution, who knows? Thank you for those questions and keeping it brief. Sorry to miss on this. So, we are now going to move on to a real celebration of Honorary Fellows of the Society. I'm right in saying, Phil, we get, that's it, there we go. That's the current, I'm not expecting you to be able to read that, but that gives you a flavour of those that have come before. I'm going to invite up to the stage Caroline Roberts, Will Pope, and Tatum, our policy lead from the Society, to go through the next stages of this evening. Caroline, over to you to host proceedings for the next section.
Thank you, Dougal.
Well, if you just come up here.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Caroline Roberts. I'm the chair of the Honorary Fellows panel for the Society, and a past chair of the Society, which I think is actually a requirement for the role. But anyway, and in real life, I have a kind of portfolio career. I'm the first Gresham College Professor of Environment, and have a number of other roles as well. It's interesting actually because Gresham College, for those of you who don't know it, started in 1597 to give lectures to the public. And it only just got to having a Professor of Environment 4 years ago, so I was the first. So that I just did the arithmetic in 421 years to get to that position, and of course the Society got there before them, in fact, the Society for the Environment, so that's good. So we do have a very distinguished set of names up here, and we're going to award 3 more tonight to join them. People get awarded as an honorary fellow of the Society for one of 2 or 3 reasons, really. They are people in the public eye who have made a distinguished contribution to the knowledge and understanding about environment, usually in the public domain, or the other possibility is that they have made a distinguished contribution to the development and progress of the Society itself. And that's certainly, both of those are going to be very evident in the 3 we're going to award tonight. So these are in no particular order, but I want to invite, first of all, Dr. Paul Leinster, CBE, to come up. Paul. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about Paul. Many people will know Paul. He was the chief executive of the Environment Agency from 2008 to 2015. He was awarded a CBE in 2008. He started life as a chemist, I think, actually. Somebody has to do it, you know. But he had a continuing commitment to the environment, really from the day he joined the Environment Agency, and he's particularly interested then, I think, in better environmental regulation without excessive cost to businesses and at minimal bureaucracy, which is, I think, probably something all of us would welcome. He's currently the Professor of Environmental Assessment at Cranfield University and a member of the government's Natural Capital Committee and a whole raft of other things as well. So we won't go through all of them. Many more things are listed on the citation in the frame there. So Paul, many congratulations. The second Honorary Fellow of the Society today is Dr. Mark Fletcher, and Mark is the Global Water Business Leader at Arup, and he has responsibility, it says here, for all water and flood risk related business. In 2014, there you are. 2014, he had an honorary doctorate from the University of Bradford for his work on water engineering and sustainable water management, and he has innumerable charterships. Again, they're listed on the framed award. He just returning to his work with Arup. He leads their water business. He has worked on really to try and shift thinking, I think, within Arup and the governments and municipalities and businesses with which it engages, and we heard some of that about that earlier from Stephanie. It works around the world and is particularly interested, I think, in the need for resilient and sustainable blue-green infrastructure and water-sensitive urban design. So, Mark, congratulations. And then the final honorary fellowship that we're going to award tonight goes to Dr. Emyr Roberts. Where's it gone? There you are. Right. Dr. Roberts was the first Chief Executive of Natural Resources Wales and has been a huge driving force in delivering what is, I think, now an integrated and sustainable management system for all kinds of natural resources in Wales. It's had an eye very much to the well-being of future generations, and I think in some cases has set a role model for the rest of the UK. We haven't yet taken it up, but perhaps that will happen shortly. I think he was formerly Principal Advisor to Welsh Ministers on Education and Skills, Local Government and Public Services, and I think has brought some of that educational background into his work with Natural Resources Wales. He's a passionate convert, I think, and an advocate for the Society's cause, and I think it's for that that we are awarding you this honorary fellowship today. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Emyr is actually going to do the next talk, so maybe Will could deal with the luggage there.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, who will be back on stage later. Okay. So, Emyr Roberts, you've heard a bit about Dr. Roberts already. We shared the stage before in a tent in Bilth Wells on the hottest. We were at the back of a tent similar size to this, and it was the hottest day of the year, wasn't it? And it took me 3 weeks to recover, and I jest not. You may remember, Charlie, I was off for quite a while with some pretty bad heat stroke as I sort of changed that. Yeah. I'm hoping tonight goes a little bit better. Okay. Over to you.
Well, noswaith dda. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed. Can I start by just really thanking the Society for the Environment for this award. I'm really humbled by the honour, especially when I saw the list of the other distinguished people who have received the honour. I'm really, really grateful, and this means a lot to me. Thank you very much indeed. I would also like to thank one person in particular who was one of the driving forces behind establishing the Society and achieving its Royal Charter status and its prominence today. He was also the driving force behind another unique and innovative organisation which is changing the approach to environmental management, at least in Wales, and this is the subject of my short talk this evening. I am, of course, referring to Peter Matthews, and it's great to see Peter here this evening. Peter was the first chair of Natural Resources Wales, and under his guidance, a new body has been created which shares many of the same attributes as the Society for the Environment. A multidisciplinary approach to the long-term sustainability of our natural resources, based on sound professional evidence and innovative thinking. I owe a personal debt of gratitude to Peter for his advice and encouragement over what was at times a turbulent passage for the fledgling NRW. Through it all, Peter remained calm and resolute and helped guide the ship through choppy waters. And Peter, I count you as one of my BFFs. Would you join in me in showing your appreciation for what Peter has done for the Society, Natural Resources Wales and the environment over many years? Turning now to environmental policy in Wales, I'd like to share with you some of my insights and views about the current position and perhaps how we can all learn from Wales's experience. There's certainly a lot to celebrate and there's also a lot more to be done. I've grouped my thoughts into 5 areas and I'd like to present these to you as a series of statements, my manifesto, if you like. I'm not specifically going to refer to plastics, but I'm going to pick up some of the themes which have already come out this evening. Probably needless to say, they reflect my own views and not necessarily those of any organisation that I am or have been involved with. The first is that we need a more joined-up approach among environmentalists and environmental organisations. Natural Resources Wales began its work on the 1st of April 2013 and was formed from the merger of 3 previous statutory organisations, Environment Agency Wales, the Countryside Council for Wales and Forestry Commission Wales, together with functions previously carried out by the Welsh Government, in particular marine and species licensing. The vision was a simple one, a one-stop shop for environmental advice, delivery and regulation, and to combine the skills and experience of over 2,000 staff at that time. It is a unique combination of responsibilities. There is no other body in the world which compares to it. And in the Welsh context, it makes absolute sense in terms of scale and remit. 5 years on, I don't think anybody is arguing for a return to the previous arrangements. At the beginning, there was concern from some quarters about whether a body should or could carry out the functions of a regulator, an advisor, a commercial operator, and an active participant in managing Wales's natural resources. Let me say that the emphatic answer to that is yes, and the initial concerns have not materialised. It has been absolutely vital, for instance, to have continuous feedback from the regulatory side to the policy and to the practical. For example, in strengthening waste regulation and in managing our shellfish stocks. By directly managing 7% of the land area of Wales, we also had hands-on experience, so we had real skin in the game. The combination of roles also enables NRW to champion the environment in a way that just being a regulator or an advisor just wouldn't. When I was appointed Chief Executive, I did not come from any of the previous organisations or have a background in the environment. I think this was an advantage, as one of the issues that surprised me were the cultural differences between the legacy bodies and even within them. This partly reflected differences in ways of working, but also differences of view as to how the environment should be managed and what it was there for. And yes, the environment does have many purposes and uses, but it seemed to me that quite often a rather narrow view was taken of what those objectives should be. There was a need to actively bring together the different perspectives and disciplines in order to explore what could be achieved if we worked in a multidisciplinary way. Which is why we spent some time engaging with our people to work through what NRW's purpose, the sustainable management of natural resources, means in practice. We ran a series of area trials and designed a programme of workshops, bringing the different experts together to test our approach and how we could optimise the environment for nature, people and the economy. And I'm pleased to say that there is now a much greater understanding about how the various experiences and skills can be combined to achieve the best outcome for the environment. The work on natural solutions to flooding and on combining renewable energy with conservation are examples of this. But more broadly within the environmental community, I still see a lot of division and parochialism. And it seems to me that if we are to get our messages across, then the whole sector will need to act in a more joined up way than it has historically. We need to combine our different interests in the environment so that we provide a clear and consistent message to government, to the public and others. Why don't we build on World Environment Day, for instance, to deliver a single long-term campaign, which we all subscribe to for the next 3 to 5 years? By way of comparison, I'm also a trustee of the Alzheimer's Society, and it has taken that length of time to really get dementia moving up the political agenda, and it can be achieved. Which leads to my second statement, that evidence must underpin all that we do, and we need to defend and promote the truth. There is a lot being said at the moment that we're living in a post-truth society, and that the decisions are being taken on the basis of populism and sound bites. NRW faced this issue on a regular basis, and we had to contend with all kinds of accusations and spurious science. As we all know, it is easier to put up a sensational statement than to dismantle it with strong evidence, especially if it takes time to collect the facts. However, that is a task for all of us, and I know that society is committed to this. The Environment Wales Act 2016 required NRW to produce a report which set out the condition of Wales's natural resources, the State of Natural Resources Report, or SONAR. Our teams spent many months consulting with others and sifting through the evidence and data to present a comprehensive study which explains how pressures on Wales' natural resources are resulting in risks and threats to our social, cultural, environmental and economic well-being. The full report, which runs into several hundred pages, is available on the NRW website and has been very warmly welcomed. This is a summary of the report, and I was very keen that we translated its findings into simple messages which non-scientific people could understand. I also wanted us to identify opportunities going forward and not just report on the past. We suggested 8 main areas of risk and opportunity. I'm not going to go through them here, they're in the report. But interestingly, the one that really gained traction was the finding that Wales, and indeed the UK as a whole, has amongst the lowest proportion of land area under woodland in the whole of Europe. 15% in Wales, 13% in the UK, and the European Union average is 37%. I think that came as a shock to a lot of people. Now, we can debate the kind of woodland that we want in this country, but there is a growing realisation, I feel now, that we need to increase our woodland cover both in the countryside and in woodland areas. In urban areas. NRW and other environmental regulators face immense pressure to reach certain decisions, especially when jobs and infrastructure are at stake. Some of the most difficult issues relate to renewable energy projects, from small-scale hydropower to wind farms to tidal lagoons. In principle, of course, we are all in favour of renewable energy over carbon-emitting sources, but there is almost always an environmental consequence. In each case, it is essential that there is a full evidence-based analysis of the situation and an invite to others to bring forward alternative evidence if they wish. And at NRW, we were able to withstand challenges to our position because of the strength and the robustness of our analysis, and this must continue to the future. It is therefore important to present evidence in a clear and accessible way, which takes me to my third statement. If we are to persuade the public of the importance of the environment, then we need to bring them into our world and make environmental issues relevant to their lives. One of my regular frustrations as a CEO of an environmental body was how little media coverage we got from all the great work we were doing day in, day out. We would be in regular dialogue with journalists. Often they were not so interested in the good news, which they were deemed to be not newsworthy, but they were also always interested in a disagreement or a failure. Rather than get defensive about this, I would urge all environmentalists to consider how we can make the issues more interesting and relevant, and to draw attention to what can be done to improve the situation. The structure of NRW was deliberately built around place, and we worked with communities to develop a sense of place so that people can take pride in their immediate surroundings and want to take an active part in learning about them and improving them. We also need to simplify the language that we use. The sustainable management of natural resources or ecosystem services don't mean a lot to most people. there is a tendency to overcomplicate rather than keeping to simple words like nature and wildlife. I think people can join up the dots themselves. The environmental movement has had considerable success recently, as we've already heard, about drawing the attention to the damage which plastics can cause, especially in our oceans. And it's obviously very appropriate that we're celebrating World Environment Day with Beat Plastic Pollution. Again, we've heard a lot about this all this evening, including the plastic bag charge in Wales. And I'm very proud that Wales was the first nation in the UK to introduce a plastic bag charge. And it's very pleasing to see scientific evidence showing that the positive benefits of the charge on reducing the amount of plastic bags in our seas. The not so good news from recent CFAS reports is that the amount of other plastic items has increased, so the total amount of plastic in our seas has remained constant. Fourth, we need to reach out to other agendas. It is really important that the environmental sector reaches out and becomes parts of other agendas, such as public health, the economy, social cohesion, anti-poverty, and so on. Thankfully in Wales, there is a very far-reaching piece of legislation which helps with this, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The Act sets out 7 wellbeing goals and a number of principles to encourage long-term thinking and working with people and communities to deliver solutions. Public services boards are established in each local authority area in Wales with a remit to improve the well-being of its area. Natural Resources Wales is a statutory member of all the PSBs and that's been of great benefit in getting our messages across to the wider population. An example of some of the issues that we contributed towards, I mentioned earlier the area trials. We worked, one of the issues in Wales, and particularly South Wales valleys, has been deliberate grass fires. The setting alight of hillsides in South Wales valleys has been a problem for many years, and in many communities it's seen as a rite of passage for some of the youngsters there. In spring 2015, there were 244 deliberate fires in the Rhondda Valley alone. Our primary interest in the past was around the effect of these fires on local habitats, in particular damage to butterfly colonies and other wildlife. However, by discussing the issue with local communities, we quickly realised that there was widespread concern in the valley about the impact of the fires on people's health, safety and the appearance of their areas. It was a place issue. The fires were also a massive drain on public resources. So we worked with the Fire and Rescue Service, 8 other core partners, local farmers, volunteers to deliver a programme which included education and raising awareness of the issue, better land management techniques, new equipment. As a result, the number of deliberate grass fires in South Wales reduced by 45% between 2015 and 2016. And from an environmental perspective, we've delivered a more sustainable landscape and more resilient habitats. And finally, in formulating a post-Brexit environmental policy, we need to incentivise the right kind of land and marine management and the right behaviours. We currently have a golden opportunity to establish policies to improve the environment for the future. We all know that present land use policies, in particular the Common Agricultural Policy, have not worked well for the environment. Indeed, the evidence is that they have been very destructive. I'm not sure that they have worked well for farmers either, given that they incentivise the intensification of production, which can only lead to long-term damage. It's a huge source of frustration to NRW, as the environmental regulator, to have to deal with the consequences of agricultural pollution, mainly from the accidental or intentional release of slurry onto land, which then goes straight into rivers and causes catastrophic damage to fish and aquatic life. Of equal frustration, though less dramatic, is the constant erosion of soils off fields due to poor farming practice, which again end up in rivers and damages the wildlife. It seems to me that the current approach of a policy which is essentially about supporting farm incomes and then trying to compensate in some way with environmental payments is doomed to failure. It is far more sensible to create a policy which builds sustainable environmental management into farm support from the outset, and to generate an approach which incentivises the right type of land use management, which is good for the environment and for those who manage it daily. In this respect, I am encouraged by some of the recent statements of the UK government. It seems to me that public money for a public good is a sound principle to work from. Now is the time to think creatively about this new approach, and we need to ensure that environmental evidence and solutions are at the heart of the new policy. I'm sure that the Society for the Environment and its members can play an important part in that process. I think I'll draw it to a close now, and I hope these thoughts have been of interest to you. We live and work in a fantastic environment in Wales and the UK, and it's been a privilege for me to be part of it. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Cymdeithas yr Amgylchedd. Thank you again, Society for the Environment.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Emyr. Very thought-provoking, and thank you for your thanks to Peter, that was very, very kind of you. People have put a huge amount of effort into the society over the years. I'm glad you've got on top of the fires. I do, forgive me, this rather frivolous response. I was a student in 1986, and I was posted to the Vale of Neath at Riola, and I was sent to fight a fire that had started up in the valley, and I got out of the Land Rover and I rolled out the hose and I turned around to connect it and the Land Rover had gone. It is about place. And I was in the wrong place as a young English student, I can assure you.
I can assure that NRW has lost quite a bit of equipment up there as well.
Thank you. But I understand you're investing in equipment now, so that's good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Paul, if you'd like to come up, please. So, over to you, Paul. I seem to have history, which I wasn't aware of until people had spoken, but I'm certainly aware of what you've done on the actual capital committee, as I was on the major landowners group for a while, and it's fantastic work. And I think Paul is also going to take us into a sort of mode of looking forward. And a little, whilst I do that, I'm going to contradict myself by reflecting on last year's theme, which was connecting people to nature. Which is very much, I know, something that in your heart, those of you who were here last year. We don't know what next year's theme is going to be, but it's very good to have you here, Paul. You are exceptionally welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Society for the Environment for awarding me this honorary fellowship. I'm deeply humbled when, as Emyr was saying, when you look at everybody else who's got one, to see that next year my name will be up there, then I am truly humbled but very grateful. So thank you very much. It was also a pleasure to be awarded it by Will. Will and I go back to 1975 at Imperial College. And we did what we now, well, I'd now cheat on my CV and call environmental engineering. In those days, it was public health and water resource engineering. And so we have a long history ever since then. As you mentioned, I'm a chemist. And Jean Venables, who's in the audience now, I had the pleasure and the challenge of teaching civil engineers some chemistry and supervising their laboratories. One of the biggest challenges in that was realizing that 10% of the male population is indeed colorblind. When people are doing titrations and they can't see the color change, but continually pour more and more reagent in, and hadn't realized that maybe there was some other reason going on. And Peter Matthews, very kindly, paid for one of the chapters in my PhD on Haverhill sewage works. And there are others in the audience who I've known for years, so it's a great pleasure to be here. So I just wanted to touch on some of the work that I'm currently doing, and I think that it is vitally important that we engage with in the here and now around the environment. I think that the 25-year plan for the environment is a great start, but it is only a start. I think one of the biggest risks, strangely, for the environment and for future environmental policy is Mr. Gove going. Unless we are able to land some things into statute before Mr. Gove goes, then there is a big risk. The 25-year plan that we have now is entirely different to the 25-year plan that his predecessor would have written and that his predecessor's predecessor would have written. So you can just see how many versions that we've gone through. It would have been entirely different. But underpinning all of that, we have this, this to be the first generation to leave the environment in a better state than the one that we inherited. That is a huge challenge. One of the things that we see in a lot of legislation coming through, especially from Europe, is no deterioration. We shouldn't underestimate the cost of no deterioration, let alone recovery to where it needs to be, and then improvement above that. And so there is a lot of work to be done. Now, I think one of the answers to the environmental impact assessment is net gain, and we'll come to that. Because I saw one environmental impact assessment which was 7 filing cabinets full, and it came in wheelbarrows, literally. Now, nobody's going to read that, and therefore, why have we done it? And why have we done it to ourselves to be producing those things? So being able to get into the 25-year plan, net gain was a big step forward. Now, people have said, but what do you mean by net gain? I'm not sure yet, but neither am I sure about what is public goods for public money yet. But it's important that there are those policy hooks that people can go away and develop. So there is a lot of good stuff in here, but until it translates, as Ian Boyd was saying, into a strategy, that's okay. Strategies come and go. It needs to be in an action plan, but it also needs to be into legislation, I think, to get that traction for going forward. So some of the natural capital committees, it was the Natural Capital Committee that actually advised that there should be a 25-year plan, and that was taken on board. And then we also produced a How to Do It workbook in 2017. Some people have said some kind things about it, which is good. But one of the other major areas that we worked on, especially Ian Bateman, was actually getting natural capital as a concept embedded with the latest version of Treasury's Green Book. That's how the public sector evaluates public sector projects. And having natural capital embedded in the mechanism is a huge step forward. And so those are 2 good things that have happened. But we don't have quantified measures of success. If you look at the goals within the 25-year plan, it's clean air, clean water, thriving wildlife. But what does that mean? In 2045, what do we want the environment to be? Now, within the Climate Change Act, we have, by 2050, an 80% reduction in carbon against the 1990 baseline. That's what it works towards. What's the equivalent of that for each of the goals? So that's one of the things that the NCC is working on, to actually get quantified goals rather than vague statements or wishes or aspirations. So we need targets. And then we need metrics to assess the progress against those goals. And those need to be in place. The plan should be on a statutory footing. Has to be. Now, we know that there has been disagreements between DEFRA and Treasury. It's well publicised. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, in any consultations, and there's a consultation just now on governance, and what future governance looks like, we need to make sure that we have a strong voice in what that future governance looks like. Now, I think one of the powerful things is that industry also wants a strong governance arrangement because they want certainty. Risk equals uncertainty equals problems. So I think that we need to have the plan on a statutory footing. But then that needs to be accountable to Parliament, because it's stepping in the place of the European Commission and the European Court of Justice holding government to account. So it needs to report to Parliament in the same sort of way as the Climate Change Committee does, rather than to the Secretary of State. Otherwise, you've got somebody marking their own homework. Now, we all know what it's like to mark our own homework. And it's the same thing here. But then it needs to translate into, and then what are the arrangements going to be at a local level as well as a national level. How does it all come together? And we need full engagement with the health and well-being agenda. Not to try and capture the health budget, because we're not going to. That'll just cause reaction. But working alongside, I think by pooling resources, we'll be able to deliver more with the existing budget. There are challenges in that. There are 130 in England alone, 130 health and well-being boards. There are 40 local nature partnerships. There are 10 river basins. There are 100 catchments. There are 14 DEFRA group areas. The geography doesn't work. And somehow we need to work out what that governance looks like of top-down, national, with sideways local governance. Natural capital principles. This for me is about natural capital assets, not ecosystem services. There's a lot of talk about ecosystem services. I think that's a great weakness, because if you just focus on ecosystem services, for me it's like the revenue budget. It's how much I'm spending. The asset base is our reserves. If you spend £1,000 a month but only have £10,000 in the bank and don't put any more money into the bank, by month 11 you have nothing. And that's what we're doing to natural capital just now. And it's also what we're doing because we focus on services, not on assets. So we need to understand the asset base that we're talking about and whether it's at risk, what's increasing or decreasing. Most of it decreasing just now. And we also, within all of this, must make sure that we don't forget the biodiversity, because it's very difficult to put an economic value on biodiversity, and therefore it gets forgotten. Now, I think putting values on things is important in the right context. A lot of people say you can't put a value on the invaluable. Problem is, if you don't put any value on something, it has no value. It's not invaluable. And the people who are deciding on project expenditure, including within Treasury, including within councils, would say it has no value, not it's invaluable. It doesn't score within the economics. And so we do have to consider that. So, going forward, if we are to truly protect and enhance the environment, we need an agreed approach to natural capital assessments. Just now, 1,000 flowers have bloomed. There's all sorts of different ways. Each consultancy has got a different way of doing it. Each local council gets confused because it's trying to evaluate the results from different consultancies, all saying different things. We need a single agreed way that this is done. And I think that that can be done very quickly. We need to understand what the underpinning assets and the condition of those assets are. And we also need an agreed approach to what net environment gain means. So we've got net biodiversity. So we started off with no net loss. Not very good. Then we started with net biodiversity gain, then net natural capital gain, and now it's net environment gain. The difference between natural capital gain and environment is just the word. The Secretary of State didn't think people would understand natural capital. Absolutely true. And so he substituted environment within it. But we need this, and I'll come to this on the final slide, which is the next one. We also need all local authorities to fully implement the National Policy Planning Framework. We've just had a consultation on the NPPF. It finished a few weeks ago. Even though the 25-year plan said net environment gain, most of what's referred to in the NPPF is net biodiversity gain. So it sort of shortchanges it. And in addition to that, it still has the unless and except. Problem with the unless and except statements within it is most local authorities can find a way of accepting. And then they go, well, yes, we would do that, but, you know, it's quite difficult. So we need to have a look at that. The other thing that sometimes happens, often happens, in planning is somebody gets halfway through a development And then the developers go to the local council and say, well, you know that social housing and that affordable housing that was going to go in there, it's a bit expensive now, you know, and you know we were going to do net environment gain, and you know that we were going to put some money aside to maintain in perpetuity. Well, we can't. Do you want us to finish this or not? Now, it takes a brave council to actually face them down, but I think we need to find ways of having that. One of the other things is that natural capital often spreads across local authority boundaries and also country boundaries. And there's a duty to cooperate in the NPPF, the existing NPPF, between local authorities. Do they cooperate? Not very often, because they're so busy. And you just have to look at the local plans which are being developed just now. Take one near me. There's a new development being proposed, 2,500 to then 4,500 houses. A new station is being proposed for that. Nobody's going to be allowed to get into the houses until the station has been developed. 7 miles up the road into a different county or into a different council, they're proposing a new parkway station on exactly the same railway line. Will both happen? No. Will either of them happen? Unlikely, because none of them have spoken to Network Rail. And you just go, but they haven't spoken to each other about whose development is going to happen close to that boundary. So some thoughts on environmental net gain. So for me, it has to go net biodiversity gain plus. That's what you do. And that for me is important. We restore and maintain the existing natural capital as the minimum. Then we also include the so-called insignificant impacts. I was talking to one of the infrastructure providers about this, and she just dropped in. Well, of course, we never deal with the insignificant impacts. I said, well, how insignificant are they? Well, about 15%. Said, it doesn't sound very insignificant to me. So what we need to do is think of the figure and add 20%, because people will underestimate those insignificant impacts. So we need to include those so-called impacts. Then we need to think about how we're going to provide mitigation, restoration, enhancement, compensation, and maintenance. When we're looking at the economic appraisal, we need to think about the costs and the benefits, not a cost-benefit, the costs and the benefits, and I think it's important. If you have a cost-benefit single figure, that will hide a multitude of sins. You could be really impacting something, but if you've claimed some economic benefit from recreation or well-being or beauty, and you put an economic figure on that, you can go through ancient woodland, but your single economic figure will come out as positive. That shouldn't, to me, shouldn't be allowed. So we need to look at both what the benefits and the disbenefits are. And for me, we also need to have a look at not allowing a trade-off between natural capital asset gain and other benefits, which might be recreation, it might be heritage, it might be built environment. Now, those are all very important, but they need to go and get their own pots of money to deal with those. What we're talking about is if we truly want this to be the first generation to leave the environment in a better state, then we need the investment in natural capital assets. And just as a random figure, once you've done all of your restoration, so your mitigation and your restoration to a sustainable, resilient habitat, then at that stage, we then think about investment in new natural capital. This is the net gain bit, not the 20% bit, not the restoration bit, not the enhancement bit to get into resilient. Now we come to the plus 20%, and then you can think about what new natural capital you would invest in. And 20% seems a good figure to me, maybe 30%. But I think we need to be progressing this. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, stay up. Fantastic. So, Emyr, if you could also come back up to the front, please. I can't believe I actually said to Paul when he arrived, I'm sorry to say, but could you be quite thought-provoking and challenging? He looked at me in a very strange way. Clearly haven't heard me speak before. So, questions for these two esteemed gentlemen. Wow, lots of hands. Elaine, you can be in charge of who to give a microphone. I will give up my chairing duties. Yes, work your way down that side. Apologies to this side. It does feel like your tail end, Charlie's, but we'll get to you.
John Edmonds, I'm an Honorary Fellow. Paul, that's a fairly substantial agenda, and I speak cautiously. And the trouble with campaigning behind a very large agenda...
Questions, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a question.
Sorry, I do apologise. There's 5 or 6 hands on that. So.
Thank you. Yes, I'm an Honorary Fellow, and I'm going to take a certain amount of time for that. Thank you. It's a very large agenda, and the trouble with large agendas is that you sometimes end up with all of the little bits, because they can be easily agreed and easily conceded through the political and parliamentary process, but you don't get the biggies. What's the first priority?
I'm glad you kept going. That's a great question.
What's the first priority? I think it is to recognise that what the challenge is of truly being the first generation to leave the environment in a better state. We need to get that. So the first challenge for me, I think, is getting the 25-year plan on a statutory footing with the appropriate governance supporting it. If we can land that, then I think some of the other things will flow.
Statutory accountability.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, David Bunt, Chairman of the Institute of Fisheries Management and ex-employee of both the Environment Agency in England and in Wales for 30 years. Paul and Emyr, thank you for your insightful talks. You talked a little bit, Paul, about the 25-year plan, and Emyr you both mentioned the future environmental body. You both have the benefit of hindsight of running the 2 largest environmental organisations in this country. What would be your advice to the government of how that new independent body should be shaped?
I think governments, whether it's in Cardiff or in Whitehall, are just underestimating the value of the environment. I think the importance of getting this right, particularly in post-Brexit, is absolutely vital. So I think it's a matter of learning from what we've got, not throwing things like regulation out of the door. That has a role to play as well. I also think it's to do with, I think the main priority in front of us is a sustainable land use policy. I mentioned the examples on farming. It's vital, I think, for the economy of the country, but also for the environment. We have that well worked through plan, policy, sustainability for the countryside and for rural areas. So I think, don't move too quickly on that. You need, I think Paul touched on this, you need an independent mechanism against which you can actually be judged. Don't do away with that. But think creatively about that land use policy going forward. Because the whole point about Brexit, isn't it, is that we have the authority, the policy levers ourselves. Well, let's use them. There's enough brain power to actually do this. So, don't rush, but let's get it right.
I think one of the other challenges, and I agree with that, I think one of the challenges is going to be, is this body a UK body? Is it, or do the 4 nations go their separate way? And that hasn't been bottomed out yet either. So that could work at 2 levels. One might be that the overall holding to account, because you might need that holding to account for trade purposes, to make sure that everybody's playing by the rules for trade, which is going to be a new area for us. But then what then happens in terms of, it'll be up to the individual countries to set their own targets for their own natural capital assets. They might join together, they might not. They might just share practice.
Chairman's privilege. Yes. So, national or UK? You know, the body, the environmental body, which would you plump for? I'm going to ask you this in a minute, Paul.
Yeah. I think the forces of devolution are that Wales will want to have as much control as possible over its own policies. I think probably the interesting area is this, policies, is the holding to account business, which
marking your own homework.
I think sits better at the UK level. Yeah. But I think Paul's touched on it really. Is that I think there's a lot of commonality here, as long as it doesn't distort trade between the various countries. But within that, I think there's plenty of roles for for flexibility. I think within that thing.
And Paul, you're nodding. You'd agree with that? Quite a lot of devolution with some. Research.
Yeah, I mean the big challenge is going to be, and this hasn't been talked about either yet, which is, it's the pulling back of powers to Whitehall or to the House of Commons, and then the devolution back out again that has to happen on some of these matters. And that's going to be tricky stuff.
Okay, some more questions. Martin, you've had one, sorry, just if there's some fresh hands. So Ian and then the gentleman to the back in the middle.
42. Ian Byrne. I'm an accountant by background, and I get very nervous when I see people trying to reduce what are essentially non-numeric things to a single figure or a single percentage, like a 20% 20% net gain in the environment. How can we be certain that we're actually going to end up with something that means something on the ground at the end, rather than just a number? A bit like Douglas Adams' answer as to what's the ultimate question.
Well, the 20% figure is a sum of money that then gets invested. It's not a 20% net gain in natural environment. And it's just a way of working out for what is the sum of money we are going to require developers to set aside to invest in. But it's a positive investment in, over and above, the restoration and the protection and the enhancement.
Okay, thank you. Colin and then Georgina.
Thanks very much indeed. Colin Church from CRWM, the professional body for resource and waste managers. And I'm going to touch on that. At the moment, in most parts of the world, we talk about our approach to managing waste and resources in kilograms or tonne terms. Lots of people think we should move away from that as a set of metrics. People talk about carbon, embedded water, and so on and so forth. But the other one that people have started to talk about is natural capital. I struggle with that because, first of all, when I look at the natural capital assessment tools that are out there, none of them really deal with resource and waste management. Yeah. And secondly, I struggle to see how to deal with resource and waste management. So, what do we do? Should we do more to incorporate considerations of resource efficiency and managing waste and avoiding material extraction in the Amazon or the polar regions or whatever it might be? How do we deal with that in natural capital concepts? Or is it just too difficult and we should go and talk carbon instead?
No, I think you can, well, it depends where you're talking about it. So within the Amazon, I would talk about it in the Amazon, and there you do have natural capital impacts that you can manage. Within the 25-year plan, though, and it's been one of the discussions that we've had around the National Capital Committee, is the 25-year plan a plan about environmental protection and enhancement, or is it a natural capital plan? It's in fact an environmental plan which takes into account pressures like climate change, resource use, and I think that we should use natural capital as a concept and an approach where it helps us deliver first generation. And we should think about other things where it's easier to consider waste and resource use and carbon in a slightly different way, as long as what we're trying to do is protect and improve the environment. So it's a mix for me.
Georgina.
Thanks. Georgina Stickles from the World Food Programme. Stephanie talked earlier about one of the challenges that, specifically with the IA, but something that we, I think, all face as environmental practitioners, which is how do we make sure that what we do is achieving more than just leaving the environment a little bit less crap than it was. Certainly Paul's talked about the vision side, but my question's for Emyr, because I think you touched on something that is really potentially the solution for us, which is bringing everything together. So we're not just looking for win-win scenarios, we're looking for win-win-win-win scenarios, looking at environment as part of the whole. How do we do that, though, in a way that doesn't just get bogged down in the trying to find the common ground, the negotiated solutions? I work for the UN, so we're masters at talking for a great deal of time and not getting a lot done. So how do you get a result out of that?
I think it calls for a lot of partnership working. I mentioned this in passing, in reaching out to other agendas. What Paul mentioned was in passing as well, but for instance the link to the health agenda. We all know that health money, the vast majority of health money is going on the end of health, when you have a problem, basically. No government in the UK certainly has taken the country to the convictions and shifted real resource into the prevention agenda. We know the environment is really important for healthy living, for preventing these problems from arising in the first place, for physical health and mental health. And one of the projects that Natural Resources Wales was involved with, is social prescribing, whereby family doctors, instead of prescribing medication, actually work with community groups, sit them out to parks and reserves and so on, to get physical exercise and health and all the rest of it. So I think to make that kind of difference, we have to get engaged with these other agendas, and they have to in turn understand how important the environment is to them, their agenda. So from a health perspective, you will save X million if you actually help stop prevent people from getting into that condition in the first place. So that's the kind of thing I would do.
Thank you. I'm going to have to call it to a close. I think we could go on a long time, but it's thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. You're all showing amazing stamina, and we need stamina if we're going to beat plastic pollution, was what I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is a lot packing into an evening, but we're going to need a lot more stamina. But thank you to all our speakers. Thank you very much. If I can ask the presentation party to come back up to the front, please. Okay, so you're...
Okay. Do I need that?
You might because of that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes, so there's a sort of... Yeah. Okay, Karen.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Well, it's my privilege this evening to introduce the the outcomes of the Environmental Professional of the Year competition for 2018, and I want to just preface it by saying I've had a portfolio career, still have a portfolio career, and I see a lot of extraordinary people in my worlds, in private, public and academic and voluntary sectors. And the environment is something that makes people very excited and very passionate at times, which is a good thing. Though it can also produce extraordinary people in a range of other ways. And I should say I used to I worked for several years for Innovate UK, the government's innovation agency. And we had a couple of people, or at least one person, several people actually, that I encountered through that who were passionate, and certainly passionate and rather extraordinary in the things that they were asking for, suggesting that we invested in. We had a very interesting man who was suggesting adding toxic materials to drinking water so that its viscosity would be reduced and we would save an awful lot of carbon when we pumped it around, but didn't give much attention to how we were going to get it out again before it actually came out of your tap. So that was pretty extraordinary, pretty passionate he was. To give you another example, I said earlier that I give public lectures for Gresham College, and I was giving a lecture when I touched on the issue of fracking. I had a photograph up on the screen actually of fracking in America just at the end of my lecture. I hadn't actually offered an opinion, I was looking at the role of professional bodies in moulding the arguments around this issue, actually. I hadn't said what my own view was, pro or con. And then just as I came to the end, a man leapt to his feet and he grabbed the microphone from the young man who was about to take it round, you know, for questions. Be very careful, Elaine. I might prompt something here. He grabbed it and he started shouting, "You're a liar! You're a liar!" You see, very, very passionate. And it turned out that he was proposing he was running a company that was proposing to start fracking underneath London, which I thought was kind of interesting, but it upset quite a lot of the people in the audience who were predominantly London-based. And, you know, actually a rather intense debate started, a very high-volume debate of people shouting, "Shut up and sit down," and "You're an idiot," and he was still shouting that I was a liar and everything. And I thought to myself, yeah, the environment does you know, instill quite a lot of passion into people. I have to say, I did also think, you may not know this, but Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke were Gresham professors, and I thought to myself, I bet they never had this kind of problem when they were giving their public lectures. So the environment is very special in terms of promoting both exceptional people and some passion. So it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce the 5 finalists for our competition of Environmental Professional of the Year, all of whom are passionate and all of whom are exceptional people. I'm going to give you all the names to start off with, and then I'm going to tell you who the 3 runners-up are, or the 3 highly commended. I'm going to invite them to come to the front and have their photograph taken. We can't all be ultimate winners, so there'll be 3 people who are highly commended. Then we'll announce the name of the runner-up, and then we will have the winner, and each of those we'll deal with individually. Okay? So I'm going to give you the names of the 5 finalists, and I should say these are 5 finalists selected from a very high standard set of suggestions this year. So the 5 finalists are, and I'm giving them in alphabetical order, I think, Mark Gallagher, who is the environmental advisor at Mars Wrigley Confectionery, UK. How good a job is that? Is he here? Yeah, is he here? Yeah. Second one is Dave Hampton, who is the founder and CEO of Carbon Coach Limited, which is a body organisation that works with individuals at all sorts of levels. Dave is here, I know, because I saw him earlier. The third of our finalists is James Peacock, who is a product manager at Entrade, and I think actually he's not with us tonight, couldn't be with us tonight. The fourth one is Graham Powell, who is the combined heat and power manager at Anglian Water. Where's he gone? He's there at the back. And the fifth one is Gemma Williams, who is the one of our small number of REnvTech nominations, and she is the catchment risk coordinator at Dewi Cymru Welsh Water. So is she here? Yes? Yeah, I didn't see. Is Gemma here? No? Okay, well, that's unfortunate. However, we have, I want then to just announce the 3 finalists who are highly commended and invite them to come out to the front. So they are, again in alphabetical order, Dave Hampton, Mark Gallagher and Gemma Williams. So I think we've got 2 of those, but can we give them a round of applause? So that brings us on to the runner-up, which is the second place, and the runner-up is someone who says that they want to make an impact, He believes we must protect the environment for the next generation very strongly, but has also shown that working sustainably makes business sense. He's a chemist. There's an awful lot of them around, aren't there? He worked for the Environment Agency and the Water Research Centre. From 2001, he led the Zero Waste to Landfill project at Wessex Water, and this year Wessex became the first zero waste to landfill utility company in the UK, and he then moved on to a new challenge, which was a startup called Entrade, an industry-leading online auction platform for reducing diffuse pollution. It was the first of its kind. It's won a lot of other prizes, including particularly for its work in reducing nitrates in Poole Harbour. He won the the project won the Institute of Water's Innovation Prize in 2017 and the ED Sustainability Leaders Award for Water Management in 2018. So lots of success across multiple fields, team player. So the runner-up is James Peacock, nominated by the Institute of Water. Sadly, we know that James couldn't be with us tonight, so we're going to make arrangements to get that award to him. Now, those of you who are really smart will now have worked out who the winner is, and I'm going to hope I can avoid that Oscar moment where you give it to the wrong person. Yes, I've got it. So our winner is an active Institute of Water committee member. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry. Oh dear. And a mentor committed to continuous improvement in environmental protection at home, at work and socially. Hold on, I've got lots to say here. A make, do and mend approach to life, he says, with as examples of data-informed approach, which was referenced in several of the talks today, looking at water, smart utility meters and so on, about identifying impacts and so on. He gained several awards. His efforts have gained Anglian Water Chief Executive Officer and Sustainability Awards for commitment to developing sustainable and efficient projects, which is great. He's also led and mentored projects aimed at promoting the fundamentals of reduce, refurbish, reuse and innovation to get culture change. I want to talk particularly, or mention particularly here, this is somebody who has worked across the thematic divides. So this is somebody who has worked on water, energy, waste and carbon reduction, and that's one of the reasons why he ended up as the winner. He's working on these different areas simultaneously. I've got a particular project that I was prompted to mention, which was that he refurbished a £34,000 turbocharger. I don't know what that is, but it's a turbocharger. He refurbished it 6 times to avoid having to replace it, and obviously from that saving the scrappage and the money, and has done the same thing with combined heat and power units, saving the company, I think it's something approaching £250,000, but also promoting a very low carbon approach to things generally. So he's developing now, I think, a more general strategy to improve CHP efficiency, and there are lots of figures around this. There are targets, as Paul was saying, there are definitely targets, and it's now informing the company's renewable energy investment strategy. So our winner this year was nominated by the Institute of Water, and it is Graham Powell CEnv.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, and thanks to the awards party. Very good. I think you've done that before. Okay, so a little reminder to me as much as you maybe, but thank you everybody. Thanks for our hosts again. Thank you, fantastic facility. Thank you. And I just wanted to quickly round up. Looking ahead, what next? Something that's struck me, and my pledge was about something I felt I could do, and I think I don't know where I heard this, but if it seems all too difficult, all too big, and all too scary and a bit complex, and we've had some very esteemed people who've been in places where they've made a difference, but are still coming out of those places thinking we need to make more difference. My thoughts are: do what you can do. Do the things you know. Do more of those things that you know have worked, because there are plenty of people doing other things that you may not know so much about, and they can do those things. And maybe that's just my simple way of looking at things, that I can really only do the things that I know about. And that's what I'm going to do, and I urge you to do the same. So there'll be one of these every year. It's on the same day, 5th of June every year. And we will be running a similar event next year. You can actually, Phil tells me you should actually book already. So please do that. I'd just like to say thanks to our speakers. These are pictures from the CEnv. Well, it's self-explanatory. It's written on there, isn't it? These are a selection of that competition. I'd just like to thank our speakers, Professor Ian Boyd, Dr. Costas Velis, Stephanie McGibbon, Dr. Emyr Roberts, and Professor Paul Leinster. What a fantastic lineup, and thanks very much for all of our presentation parties, and congratulations to all of our winners. The event is now concluded. We are going to go through. There's more refreshments for you to have, and thank you very much for your patience and stamina, and let's all beat plastic together. Thank you very much.
Sorry, and I know it's finished, and I just thought, however, we ought to thank some of the people who've actually caused tonight to happen. And Dougal has thanked the speakers, so I won't go there. But Paul, you certainly reminded me about why we're here and what a great time we had in the 1970s. So thank you for that. That was terrific. But could I actually thank the SocEnv WED team. Dougal, a fantastic chairing performance as well. And actually, I love the onerous presence over the questioner. So I think I've learnt something from you tonight on how to do that. So thank you very much. Fantastic for that. Carolyn, lovely orchestration, and thank you so much. But particularly, could we perhaps thank the SocEnv WED team? We've got Elaine and Jeff at the back, and Tatum and Phil. Have I missed anybody out? Emma. Well, we can't thank Emma. She's cruising somewhere, so she's on a cruise. But perhaps we could put our hands together. Thank Arup for the event, the hosting, and the WED team from SocEnv. Thank you very much.